Welcome everyone, one and all, including Dr. Anne Rickards and members of the Rickards family, distinguished guests, and of course, distinguished guests on our Zoom audience as well. At the outset, I hereby acknowledge on behalf of all of us all, the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the place in which we're gathered tonight, their elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty was not ceded, and we thank them very deeply for their grace in countenancing our presence here this evening. I'm Susie Dean, and I'm honoured to greet you here and on Zoom on behalf of Mental Health for the Young and Their Families Victorian Group, known as MIFVIC, to the 14th Winston S. Rickards Memorial Oration. I'm privileged to greet also Paul McDonald, CEO of Anglicare Victoria, who will deliver the oration titled "The State as the Corporate Parent, Raising or Managing." Organised and funded by MIFVIC, the oration is co-sponsored by other groups with which Winston Rickards was closely linked, namely the Royal Children's Hospital Mental Health Service, the Mental Health Foundation Australia, the Faculty of Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists of the RANZCP, Emerging Minds, and the RCH Centre for Community Child Health. And Professor Sharon Goldfeld is with us here in person this evening. Thank you very much. As you know, the oration is named for Winston Rickards, whose interdisciplinary work in child and adolescent mental health was groundbreaking at both national and international levels, and who, among many other initiatives, was the founding president of MIFVIC. We remain indebted to his vision for the well-being of the young and to his determination in the face of stiff odds. More than ever, MIFVIC's sole public advocacy for children's mental health in this country, in our uncertain times, despite rising awareness of mental health more generally in communities around the world, it's just so critical. And in Winston's quotation of Tennyson, to seek, to strive, to find, and not to yield. It's tough work. Should you so wish, you can gather further information about Winston's remarkable work at the desk in the foyer. Now we're moving quickly on to our oration tonight. We'd be grateful first if those present here could just check that your mobile phone's on silent. When Paul concludes his oration after 50 minutes or so, Ruth Wraith, one of our great orators of last year, will respond to his presentation, and then we'll welcome general discussion from both people present and from people on Zoom. Closer to 9:30, our President, Joe Grimwade, will say a few words, present a vote of thanks, and bring formalities to a close. Our Zoom colleagues will then leave us, and as people present move back to the foyer, a photo will be taken with the orator. And you can have a chance to speak with him and of course each other once we're all outside the auditorium again. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our orator tonight, esteemed social worker Paul McDonald. Paul is the Chief Executive Officer of Anglicare Victoria, the state's largest provider of foster care, family welfare and youth support services. Previously, he served as Deputy Secretary of the Children, Youth and Family Division in the Department of Human Services of the Victorian Government, overseeing child protection, youth justice and family and domestic violence programs. Paul has chaired several nationally significant committees, including one on petrol sniffing, and is the former chair of the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare, the peak organisation of child welfare NGOs. As a founding chair, he led the National Home Stretch campaign, extending the age of out-of-home care from 18 to 21 years across Australia, for which in 2020 he won the National Pro Bono Influencer Award. In 2017, Paul was awarded the prestigious Robin Clark Leadership Award, Victoria's most celebrated Child Protection Award. Further, Paul is the patron of the National Youth Workers Association. What might also be relevant is that Paul plays tenor saxophone in a jazz funk band and confesses to be a tragic supporter of the St Kilda Football Club. Paul, would you care to come up to the podium and deliver your oration?
Thanks. That's all right. Daniel's getting himself organised. Thank you, everyone. Hello I'll put that. Hello online. Good to have you here online and good to see you joining us from wherever you are. I believe interstate and also internationally, says Joe. So great to have you with us as well as locally in Melbourne. And thank you all for coming out on a Monday night. Good on you. So first of all, I want to, before I begin, I also too want to acknowledge, I'll just get this moving. I too want to also acknowledge the land we stand on today, on Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders both past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal people in the room today. And note that what I'm going about to say tonight is particularly pertinent, as we've got, though Victoria has around a 3.3% population of Aboriginal people across Victoria, but 30% of those in out-of-home care of Aboriginal descent, and that the reforms I'll speak of today are particularly pertinent to that fact. Some acknowledgements. I want to acknowledge the Rickards family and acknowledge Anne and the family, and which I apologise not meeting with you before I'm up here, but in your name of your dad, it's very important to acknowledge you as well. A couple of people have wandered in the room off the street. I want to acknowledge Deb Zabaris, who is, as pointed out by Susie, the CEO of the Centre for Excellence, the chief peak on children, youth and family here in the state. But also she carries the other esteemed title or role as Chair of Families Australia, which is the national peak right across Australia for children, youth and family. And she also sitting beside her, which got mentioned, Susie, Professor Sharon Goldfeld's come along as well. I think that I'd also, it's been my habit of late to, not late, for several years now, I want to acknowledge any care leavers in the room today or online, and acknowledge their experiences both in care and post-care and the people you have become today. And I want to acknowledge you here who may be listening, who have a care history and profound respect to you. It's an honour to present at the Winston Rickards Oration, an individual who's had a remarkable impact on the child and youth and mental health system as we know it today. I've looked back on the previous orators of this oration and holy moly, I come to this rostrum with some trepidation. Just in the last orations, we've had no less than 6 professors one emeritus professor, if you don't mind, one commissioner, one federal court judge, and 3 doctors. So before I begin, I'd like to apologise in advance to the Rickards family for what you may be expecting. I'm not professorial in name or wear a gown and wig in my office, but I do hope to speak on matters today that I think Winston Rickards would smile about. One of the things I noticed about Winston Rickards was his unique skill to understand a service system through the eyes of young people and to shape it according to this awareness and sense he had of them. Tonight, I want to talk with you about young people transitioning out of state care and the policy and program design that needs to be shaped around such young people. And the central feature of that policy being who and what are young people in that regard. Often policy towards young people by health, welfare or community pundits can, despite best intentions, be more miss than hit. Just go to any previous government policy and you'll get the idea if you look under the headings youth justice or drug and alcohol. Queensland government recently announced that children who do adult crime will do adult time, or the ever popular just say no to drugs that has been floating around in relation to response to youth policy over many decades, or the current juvenile justice attempt of putting ankle bracelets on young people and debating their attendance to school, and so on and so forth. And I have to say this drifted into Frankston City Council bylaws at one stage, where they decided they took a bylaw of piping classical music through the shopping malls to ensure they're moving on young people so they don't hang around. Policy that often misunderstands the target cohort in question and fails to see that one has to engage and be relevant to this age group before one can execute any treatment or intervention in the first place. Now, developing good youth policy is an art, part science, part evidence, part pragmatism, part gut feel, and part execution all in one. I remember when I started the Youth Substance Abuse Service, Australia's first treatment service specifically for young people with drug and alcohol problems. As we implemented over 150 young youth drug and alcohol workers across the streets and malls of Melbourne, I decided I'd get the well-known adolescent psychiatrist, Dr. Michael Schwartz, some of you may remember Michael, to address my 150 strong staff, youth drug treatment staff, as they are wrestling with the mix of rampant drug use, poor mental health and adolescence. Well, we all packed ourselves in, all ready to hear the great scientific wisdom and evidence by this well-known adolescent psychiatrist. And he says, well, you're thinking, what is my approach? What's my technique? What's my well-researched intervention to the adolescent? And he says, my go-to method in talking with young people, says this esteemed adolescent psychiatrist, is this. And he pulls out the Ken Blanchard little book of the 1 Minute Manager and states, this is my most effective communication reference book in adolescent psychiatry. Now, I decided to Google the 1 Minute Manager when in the 80s, it used to be all rampant, these 1 minute this. Anyway, I noticed that the 1 Minute Manager has produced another edition just recently called the 1 Minute Manager for Monkeys. True story. So I'm not sure if the zoos are having trouble or they're starting to interpret the human race heading down that way. So I'm honoured to be invited to the 14th Winston Rickards Oration. Now, coming to the event tonight, you might be going, well, who's this tosser Paul McDonald, CEO of Anglicare Victoria, and being invited to speak at this 14th and well-renowned Oration? Reasonable question, I'd be asking the same. So a bit about me first. Throughout all the roles I've occupied over the decades, whether leading the state's child protection and youth justice programs for government, or leading organisations for vulnerable children, youth or families, or leading national reform movements, I've never been too far away from working amongst young people and the developmental ride and chaos that the period of youth is. And in these roles, particularly with young people that have been dealt a shorthand of cards, whether through luck, lack of luck, or intention, or have struggled and wrestled with their place in the world, often against daunting odds, their reactions and misactions and overreactions have always been a source of great professional interest, pursuit and privilege. And in recent decades, my efforts in particular have been more amongst young people who have been or growing up in state care. State care where babies, children or young people have been removed from their families by the state due to concerns for that child's safety or welfare, or neglect or abuse, or through abandonment emotionally or physically. Now, whether my roles, managing the entire child protection system or running out-of-home care agencies such as Anglicare Victoria, or visiting the care homes and residential units as I do each and every Monday fortnight, like I did this afternoon for years, talking with the young people and staff who reside within. From all of these perspectives, I have seen how the system we have designed often misses the young person and their needs. The state in the legislated role as loco parentis. And if you didn't do Latin at school, I'll tell you what that actually means. It is described in the legislation as in the place of the parent. Operates its default position as probably more managing than raising a child, despite the Children and Youth and Families Act, which obliges a young person, which obliges the Secretary of the Department to make provision for the physical, intellectual, emotional and spiritual development of the child in the same way as a good parent would, and must work with other government agencies and community services to ensure that the children out of home care receive appropriate educational, health and social opportunities. Here in Australia, some 55,000 children and young people bed down in care each and every night. Victoria has some 10,000 children in care at any point. My organisation would place about 1,600 of those each year in homes, foster homes, residential homes or homes of kin. For some, it is a relief to be removed, and the care received has created the opportunities for them in life. And for others, despite best efforts, being in care can be littered with multiple placements, multiple care workers, living with others not of your blood or bond or choice, with times of deep worry or fear, often separated from your siblings, sometimes needing to fend for yourself or suffer for yourself, and really surviving rather than thriving as a young person shouldn't in this world. Without doubt, it can be the most challenging of upbringings to have experienced. Now, in the words of George W. Bush, I know, an unusual reference, but the system often acts, as he says, with the soft bigotry of low expectations. Low expectations that near enough is good enough. The low expectations of only a paltry of experiences and opportunities will come your way. The low expectations, or really the lack of parental interest in who you are and what you want to become. To survive in these settings till your order expires can be the achievement in itself. But when it comes to leaving care or when your order expires, since the start of legislated child welfare in this country, the system further undermines the life chances of the young person further by terminating them from their care before they turn 18 years of age. Here in Australia, as this slide represents, up to recently, all Australia's 8 child welfare jurisdictions had the same policy. Now, don't worry about folks whether states say we're not like them. Exactly the same policy in every state and territory in Australia, that your care will be formally terminated before you turn 18. And accordingly, you'll be required to provide a leaving care plan on 15. But I make one correction to my all exactly the same, except for Queensland, who didn't require that from a 15-year-old, but required that from a 14-year-old who is 9 months old. Now, as I acknowledge my son and daughter in the room with my wife, if I went up to, for example, my son at 15 and said, mate, it's time you started organising a leaving care plan. It's time to start thinking about where you need to move to. If it's time to start getting some plans, what's wrong with you? You're 15. It's time to start thinking like an adult. He probably would have said, like any other 15-year-old boy would have said for that question, and that's as far as one gets. So, no review of whether you're ready or equipped to have this care terminated. No discretion to appeal for the extension of this care. No discussion with you or assessment of you. The care system terminates its responsibilities over you on a birth date. The system says to the child, we as your carers are done with you. We will no longer have or provide obligations towards you. Even though we were your guardian, your carer, we were your parent. Corporate parent, but parent we were. Carer payments stop. Caseworker removed from child. The young person, if residing in a residential unit, is exited, and the formal accountable relationship from the legal guardian with you is severed. It is of no consequence that you may be looking down the barrel of homelessness on the expiry of your order. No consequence you may be chronically depressed or self-harming. No consequence that you may have been pregnant and the baby due in 8 weeks, or you may have had court next month, or you could have been tackling the demands of year 12, or you probably will be not at school and likely hopelessly unemployed, or you are completely bereft of independent means or resources or living capability to live independently. Nothing had changed the administration of this decision of terminating care at this point of a young person's life until Homestretch came along. Here in this country, there's around 3,000, it might be about 3,500 by now, young people who are exited from their care, from state care at this age and stage right across the country. Yet not one jurisdiction could tell you where any of these young people went to or ended up or what they are doing after they'd left care. However, we do know that the impact of this exiting on these young people is nothing short of than catastrophic. On exit, 35% will enter homelessness, 52% will present to an acute mental health service, 30% will be unemployed, 44% will be neither in work, education or training, 24% will enter into the youth justice facility, whilst 46% will be part of that system. And in relation to mental health, given the organisation that's sponsored today with the mental health for young and their families, the situation is confronting. 5 times more likely to attempt suicide in this age group, to be hospitalised for mental health condition in relation on exit of their care. And 1 in 2 present to an acute mental health service on exit of their care. And in the well-renowned child maltreatment study, a random 8,500 Australians between the ages of 16 and 65 interviewed randomly. It also found a theme of out-of-home care, in which they came across in these random surveys people who are in out-of-home care, which again shows the disparity in relation to post-traumatic stress disorder, generalised anxiety disorder, and major depressive order from those with out-of-home care histories versus those without. But let me not show any of these graphs to say these are about young people. Let's go to what Clay and his friends, all care leavers, when they're required to finish their care, have got to say.
For myself, it was more after I turned 18, 6 months down the track, everything went to crap. For myself, I got into drugs really hardcore because just nothing. And well, from there it went downhill to the extent that I was sleeping under a bridge.
Even though Child Safety had said, yeah, we'll support you, we'll be there for you, anything you need to know, anything you want, let us know, we'll be there. Come 18, you're practically packed up. 2 months before 18, I was in Resi. I went out for lunch with the regional manager and came home to the residential care, actually packing my belongings. There was about 4 different cars there, and they had packed everything, and they go, this is where you're going. to a completely drug-filled unit complex where there was so much trauma.
Because I know within myself I'm not ready to be an adult as of yet. I've only just finished basically living my childhood that I never got. So this extension to 21 will allow for those children, as for myself as well, that opportunity to learn to be an adult, what it's like to have your own house, to pay bills, learn all those skills before you're released.
What 15-year-olds needs to start thinking about housing. Like, not a lot of 15-year-olds that I have met, well, outside of care, is thinking about, where am I going to live in 2-3 years' time?
If you're in like resi care or anything, as soon as you turn 18, you're kind of like kicked out, and that's really scary.
When I turned 18, because of that, I ended up being pretty alone. All my carers told me that they weren't allowed to see me until I was 21, so it kind of felt like I was orphaned.
Kind of felt like I was orphaned. In fact, if that tape rolled 2 more seconds, she says, it kind of felt like I was orphaned again. After the first removal from the state is then removing itself from her. Now, in thinking about how do we describe this care system and how we've been treating young people up to now, I want to take you back to Sunday night at Nana Mac's when I was a kid. My parents would take me along. Every second Sunday night, I have dinner at Nan's. Nan's would serve up, you know, the roast Sunday night. You know what it's like. And then she says, who'd like some dessert? Oh, Nan, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, I'm up for that. Great. And she'd go. And you'd hear some rustling around. And then she'd walk back in with, of course, the peaches and ice cream. Walk back in. But she came in to serving dessert dressed in her nightie and dressing gown, and then serve the dessert. And I look, oh, you know, and I'd always remember she'd come in dessert in her nightie and dressing gown, not for the main course, but what is she doing? What's Nan doing? Nan is reminding us that enjoy that, but by the way, you're going. That is what the care system does. Enjoy our care, but by the way, you're going. And that is the simultaneous message a child receives in relation to being in care. In response, I founded a movement called Homestretch, and I also want to recognise Deb Zabaris, who was co-chair of Homestretch here, who's here in the room, co-chair of Homestretch here in Victoria, and set about to reform the deeply ingrained practice of terminating care leavers by getting government as an obligation to formally support and formally finance a child's needs for a further 3 years from 18 to 21. Not an empty promise, not some weasel words, not a discretionary decision, but based on an entitlement to that child by the state. Internationally, when care is extended to 21 years, it has contributed to halving homeless rates, doubling education and employment, reducing even teenage pregnancies, and also getting $400 extra in the bank if you're in extended care. And what young person doesn't want an extra $400 in the bank? And so in regard to that, we set about creating a movement of hundreds of organisations getting behind the call to extend care. Community, corporate, legal sectors, 10,000 individual members, capturing the attention of the public in that regard. And in relation to producing cost-benefit analysis from Deloitte, of which 5 were there. And in relation to doing press and profiles and campaigning through the media in relation to that. And after that, it took 8 years to change the minds and hearts of 8 different governments through reports, press and press conferences. And simply all we were doing was holding up a mirror to government in these 8 jurisdictions of the impact that the system of care we're all custodians of on these young people. And now I'm pleased to say that all 8 governments have announced formal homestretch extended care policies all the way through to 21 at the collective investment of around $350 million around the country to finance this care and support. And I want to thank my office staff for putting in some streamers as I was going down in the face there. I hope you're enjoying that at home. So now, if you calculate those figures, we have 5,250 young people at the moment in extended care. We expect to have around 8 to 10,000 by the end of 2025. Now, it's a simple decision by government for a simple act that would have such a profound impact on a young person. Decision of changing long-standing legislative practice across Australia may have been small in the scheme of things, but not only it touched carers and workers and young people, but the hearts and minds of many politicians in the country. Minister said to me, that was the most important decision of my entire political career. Others said, a Premier said it was the finest policy achievement. Historic announcement, said Premier Palaszczuk. And Premier Gowan of Western Australia, who had been leading that state for so many years and taking them through, getting them through Western Australia through COVID, you know, General McGowan, they used to call him, and all the things that he had done as Premier. On announcing his retirement, he was asked, well, Premier, what was the most proudest decision you've made in the entirety of your being Premier? And he said, and I quote, it's about 16 minutes into the press conference, he goes, when we extended that foster care thing through to 21 is his most proudest achievement. However, friends, my talk tonight is not about the campaign and what we achieved. My talk tonight is that we're not finished with this group. In fact, we're more at the end of the beginning for this highly disadvantaged, overlooked group. And we're seeking what opportunity now presents for the state in changing their life trajectories into adulthood now that we've made this advance. It is within reason to state that those coming out of state care are the most disadvantaged cohort in the country that we never name. Have a look at the data. 2/3 of Australia's homeless youths are care leaver. 50% of those in youth detention is a care leaver. They are the single largest cohort not to advance past year 10. They are the single largest cohort in unemployment figures are Centrelink. They are the highest group to take their own life between 18 and 21. And they are the single highest rates of pregnancies between the ages of 18 and 21. Yet, unlike other disadvantaged cohorts, care leavers, or those with a history of residing in state care, are not on our radar or in our policy sites when we talk of disadvantage and proactive or preventive policies. In fact, redress policy aside, they are a welfare and social policy blind spot in this country by departments and governments. In a recent Deloitte study on the cost of care leavers to government, commissioned by Homestretch, Deloitte estimated that this single small cohort costs the federal government in post-care costs over $2 billion, and for states, $600 million. Deloitte found that many of these costs were realised including through Centrelink payments, homeless youth refuge funding, hospital admissions, particularly in the emergency department, teenage pregnancies, and correctional institutions. This age and stage is as important as any period between baby and adult. Ask any parent who has an 18 to 21 year old in their household, are you still playing a parenting role? The resounding answer would be yes. According to the ABS, 85% of 18 to 21s are still residing with one or both parents. In many of these homes, it's likely that the parent will be using their knowledge, their contacts, their networks, their resources to assist their son or daughter as they go to and from independence to codependence and back again during this period. And such, the parental actions will take the form of, for example, employing their own children if they're running a business or in an organisation that can have them, or ringing a friend or family member or neighbour to take their child on for a part-time job, or leaning on someone in the family who's got some connections to a child who's got some connections to send or access some mental health support, or buying the computer or buying the next phone, or in my instance, a large industrial sewing machine, or paying the course fees, or in these tight housing times, going guarantor for a flat to get them to the front of the affordable housing schmozzle in this country. Myself, I've just signed recently for my daughter, 5th time as guarantor to a flat, and I've only got 2 children. So the role of the parent is important as even in these years, to make things happen and to help them get them through into adulthood with as few bumps as possible. Extending care to support to 21 has been powerful, but it's not the silver bullet. Homeless rates remain scandalously high. Mental health needs continue. Pathways to employment not there, and too many of their babies are also coming into care. In the absence of the family social capital that is on offer for many 18 to 21-year-olds, what could the loco parentis role of the state be for those who were the former, they were the former legal guardian over? What largesse could be brought to bear by the state for the advantage of a care leaver? What could it look like to replicate the role of the parent in this stage of their development post-18? Overseas, governments have been moving to creating policies that plays a preferential role to the children formerly under their care. These governments have noted alarmingly the mounting downstream costs as a result of poor state care transition. In the UK, they found that no less than 40% of those in young adult detention in the country had a care history. And a further countrywide study found that 60% of sex workers had a care history. In the USA, studies showed that care leavers in many states were turning to Social Security handouts to survive driving poverty, and were also leading in the crack numbers. And in turn, new babies of these care leavers also coming into care, creating intergenerational roots and histories for their families to child protection systems. These downstream costs have led governments internationally to taking their role as the corporate parent further into the post-care support phase and proactively accessing their own powers and services and resources of the state to enable the care leaver during this post-care period. For instance, the Scottish Government decided to legislate the role of extended corporate parenting, which introduced new duties and responsibilities for the Scottish public bodies defined as corporate parents. Now, the legislation lays out specific duties and responsibilities towards care leavers up to the age of 26. As it notes in the statement introducing the legislation, I've got it up here, a good parent will want the best outcomes for their looked after children, accept responsibility for them, and make their needs a priority. In the UK late last year, that government announced that legislation will be now introduced for care leavers addressing the obligation to parent from 21 to 25. The obligation to parent from 21 to 25. Government departments and relevant bodies, it writes, will be named as corporate parents and be subject to the proposed corporate parenting responsibilities. The list of corporate parents will be named in legislation following agreement from other government departments. We expect named government departments to produce 3-year plans and reports to set out how they are supporting children in care and care leavers. With the UK government noting, and I quote, that this is to recognise that these children and young people may not have the family support networks that others rely on throughout their life. And there it is, in place of the parent in action. The longer-term plan in many of these countries is to extend corporate parenting responsibilities across government departments and relevant public bodies to create a culture of change in which we'll realise the shared ambition to support children in care and care leavers. In this role, they say, all corporate parents can help to break down barriers to good outcomes for care experienced children by ensuring that relevant policies and services that impact on them are met and take account of their additional needs and circumstances, or, and here it is again, providing additional support as a parent or family member might. And the early signs are positive. In England, the proportion of care leavers attending university has increased from 1% in 2013 to 14%. In Illinois, care leavers are twice as likely to attend university as their care experienced peers in other states who do not provide the same level of support. And in California, almost 50% of all young people in care are now enrolled in a university. However, in Australia, such responsibilities are left solely to the care department of government, if at all, to do this role, despite the fact that care departments such as DFFH, Departments of Families, Fairness and Housing, or DCJ, Departments of Communities and Justice in New South Wales, have no leverage over employment or housing allocations, no command of health or mental health policy, no ability or influence in relation to any of the things of education, employment, health and housing that matters to a care leaver. I recently met with the Secretary of Health in a state, and I raised the high numbers of care leavers seeking his mental health services, and the proposition I put to him that this group should be in a queue of their own when it comes to accessing mental health services, and not in a Congo line with everyone else. Why would I do that, Paul? He said. Because I said, last time I looked, you are the state. And in fact, these children was formerly under your legal guardianship. Maybe not directly, but you as the state were actually responsible for that role of being the legal guardian over the child. And by that simple fact, they deserve such treatment from their former parent, you being part of that obligation. If government were to embrace the full meaning of the words corporate parent or in the place of the parent and compel non-care departments to play their corporate parent role, what could this new world order look like for care leavers in this country? Firstly, governments could legislate to recognise the role that they hold. That is a whole of government role, just not a role within the care department, and apply care leavers to at least this role until they're 25. In speaking with a premier recently in another state, this idea was quickly grasped. And that person said, "You mean like we do for our own kids?" "Yes, Premier, like that." And in so doing, the government could establish mechanisms to ensure that all departments are committing resources to this cohort. For instance, it could establish mandatory reporting to Parliament, maybe on a 2-yearly basis, on key outcomes for care leavers across all the different government department portfolios. It could appoint a parliamentary secretary for care leavers to oversee the whole of government policy development. And it could announce a chief advisor to government for care leavers to keep it relevant and on track and grounded in care leaver experience. In the UK, they've just appointed a care leaver advisor called Mark Riddell, a former care leaver, to advise the government on corporate parent policy and design. I'm bringing Mark to Australia in May to discuss with governments his role and also to speak at the Homestretch Symposium. It's not like we don't have other commissioners on other matters. We have a commissioner on many things, on privacy, on consumers, on veteran health. The needs of care leavers, particularly concerning mental health and veteran health, are not too far apart. We have children and youth commissioners in each state, but they bow out at 18. And the federal government, who seem to be shy, haven't quite worked out that this group is costing them this significant amount of money, still haven't got a minister for children, though I do note they've got a minister for fish. A government advisor for care leavers would go a long way to bringing focus and narrative to government about how to impact on this group and provide feedback on the effects of these measures. With care leavers being the largest single youth cohort of those that are disadvantaged, governments should be tripping over themselves to activate policy and access this group to save downstream costs. Homestretch commissioned just this year a new report from Deloitte to do a further analysis of what government federally could do for care leavers in such advantage preferencing. A tier government, federal, that is slow to see the costs and benefits for this group, yet they are the most expensive. And it arrived at this conclusion. In practical terms, a government could, for every $1 invested, get a return on $1.91. Whether that's in rental system, education hire, dental orthodontics, mobile phone plans and public transport, and get a comprehensive scenario if they started to actually provide direct funded services in ambulance, gym membership, paid internships, rent assistance again, and vehicle expenses support. I'd say that's going a bit over the top for this target group, isn't it, Paul? But when you start reading that for every $1 spent on all the wrong things, the federal government would get $1.91 return for all the good things of better wellbeing, better social adjustment, better chances of employment, better of education, it starts to stack up as not a bad deal. In practical terms, the federal government could require states also to allocate a specific allocation of housing stock from the federal government's $10 billion housing fund to those with a care leaver history to bring down youth homelessness numbers in this country. It could set targets for contractors in government big builds, projects, and target to hire those with care leaver histories as a small percentage of these big builds to demonstrably reduce Centrelink payments to care leavers sitting at 26%. Or could lift education rates for this cohort, appallingly low in secondary and tertiary settings, and waiver all course fees undertaken by a care leaver. Or on a similar level, provide free internet through the NBN to those with care leaving histories till the age of 25. Camden Council in the UK, along with other counties, provide free Wi-Fi to all care leavers till 25. And we provide free Wi-Fi to all disadvantaged families not on the broadband with school-aged children here in this country for 3 years. And 30,000 families are on that. This group could be presented as a nice, small, finite group that the federal government could actually make an action towards. And on the important area of parenting support, provide a charter by which any new mother who was a care leaver can access 12 months of support for her and her baby from a range of services. And that child protection is knocking on the door is not the first act of the state towards her, but the last, with a series of positive parent strengthening actions by the state in supporting mum and baby, or mum, dad and baby. Not only is this a good thing for mum and baby, but will demonstrably reduce entries of babies into care by a conservative 20%. Outside government, a covenant could be extended to corporate companies and organisations offering the provision of work experience, apprenticeships and free or discounted goods. And this covenant signing of corporate companies has been done in the UK, and since 2018, some 400 voluntary and corporate organisations have signed a pledge to either hire a care leaver, provide an internship for a care leaver, or to provide work experience for a care leaver. Homestretch is looking to do the same here, knowing employment is a key leg of the stool for any successful entry into adulthood. And all of the above that I've just listed is all pretty consistent with the unwritten roadmap for being a parent of a 18 to 21-year-old. So in closing, when I achieved the homestretch reforms of extended care in every state of Australia, with the team, including Deb here in Victoria and others in other states, the press commented at the time that it was, and I quote, the most significant child welfare reform in a generation. And when I was asked at a press conference what I thought of that compliment, I said this, big statement for such an ordinary shift. I said, still significant, no less, but well, it's a big statement for really what we're doing is doing something quite ordinary. The success of the homestretch reforms, with all the plaudits and acclaim and all the changing of 8 different governments, whilst maybe remarkable, are, to be honest, remarkably ordinary. It was just doing what any young person would want from its carers, mirroring the age and stage of what they are having back to its carers. Where before governments did not see this group, governments do now. This, I think, has been the second greatest outcome, apart from young people now on extended care. The fact that governments are now engaging in the post-18 phase of parenting. Maybe I'll end like this. Patrick Kavanagh, the Irish poet, in his poem titled Advent, had this line. He wrote, "Happiness can be found wherever life pours ordinary plenty." Maybe that could be another way of looking at what we are seeking for care leavers in this country. The ordinary plenty of being cared for and resourced way into your early 20s. the ordinary plenty of getting advantage from your parents, corporate parent or biological parent, to make a start in life. The ordinary plenty of creating chance and opportunity for young people to prosper and, despite their upbringing, have the best start into adulthood. And happiness will be found through all of that. I would suspect that Winston Rickards would have nodded and smiled about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul, for that inspiring oration. And I know that people will be eager to ask questions and to comment. But first, I want to introduce Ruth Wraith to respond to this really wonderful set of ideas that Paul has put before us tonight. Ruth, would you like to come up here? Ruth Wraith, OAM, is a highly eminent child psychoanalytic psychotherapist with many decades in practice, not only with individual children and young people, but also with families and with communities. Ruth is a specialist advisor, mentor across the mental health field, particularly in the area of responses to trauma and emergencies. Perhaps most notably amongst traumatised refugees and in community natural disaster and emergency organisations across Australasia and Southeast Asia Pacifica. She is a recipient of many awards, and her depth of understanding of the emotional needs of young people facing challenges is well known to many of us who are here present tonight. Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks, Susie. Paul, representing the people who are here with us this evening, people who are with us on Zoom, and the Rickards family, I thank you for your presentation for the 14th Winston Rickards Oration. You've clearly and unambiguously presented us with the stark reality of the life situation for many children and young people who unfortunately need out-of-home care. This is a situation that is a blight on our society and for which we have no excuses. As a society in general, we turn a blind eye when compared to the care and the financial support afforded other damaging and/or challenging situations that children and young people and their families and their carers find themselves in. You've also presented us with hope that the serious and indeed the damaging failings of the system for the young people who are exiting care are slowly being recognised and slowly being addressed through home stretch and other related measures. I'd like to take a moment to place this crucial pioneering initiative in the context of Anglicare's history, which has been at the forefront of awareness and service provision for children and families. Anglicare was formed in 1997 following the amalgamation of 3 of the state's most experienced child and family welfare agencies. The mission to the streets and lanes of Melbourne was established in 1886 at the time of the 1880s depression, almost 140 years ago, a long, long tradition that is now being carried forward with Homestretch. The second organisation that combined with Anglicare was the Mission of St James and St John, which was established in 1919. This was the year of the Spanish flu pandemic, when 15,000 Australians died. 15,000. And a year after the end of World War I, when 60,000 Australians died as a result of service. This was a massive loss of life from an Australian population of only 5 million. Victoria currently has a population around 7 million. A few years later, in 1926, St John's Home for Boys and Girls was founded to provide care and support for children who were orphaned or who could not live at home. And now, in 2025, Anglicare Victoria is the state's leading provider of out-of-home care services for children and young people. Paul, among the many important issues you raised, I'd like to recall the situation you described that existed before the introduction of Homestretch, as we all have to be vigilant to ensure that slow slippage and the loss of these gains doesn't happen. And I'd like to read again, Paul, how you presented to us so clearly the situation that is now being addressed by Homestretch. For the young person, until Homestretch, there was no review whether the child was ready or equipped to have the care terminated, no discretion to appeal for extension of this care, no discussion with the child or assessment of the child. The care system terminated its responsibility over the child on a birth date, not on need. The system said to the child, "We, as your carers, are done with you. We will no longer have or provide obligations towards you, even though we were your guardians, your carer, your corporate parent." The situation there was that it was of no consequence that the child may be looking down the barrel of homelessness, or the expiry of the order, or that the child may be clinically depressed or self-harming, that the child may be pregnant with a baby due shortly, that the child may have court next month. The child probably would not be at school and hopelessly unemployed, or the child could be tackling the demands of Year 12, or be completely bereft of independent means or resources. Carer payments stopped. Caseworker was removed from the child. The young person, if residing in a residential home, was exited, sent away. The relationship from the legal guardian was terminated. The child was actually floating, uncontained, unsupported. Now, by stark comparison, the requirement within the state legal system has changed to make provision for the physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual development of the child in the same way as a good parent would. And I end the quotes. Thank you, Paul, for those. This leads us to consider and be clear about, in this world of multiple challenges and evolving lifestyles, what constitutes good parenting. Here we enter into a complex and lively debate at the community society level and within the political economic context. So often, solid research, grounded theoretical knowledge, clinical and practice expertise is not sought let alone taken into account. Integrating child-centred good parenting that takes into account the internal world of the child, as well as the important external factors, into the functions of corporate parent is, I would suggest, the next challenge across the board in caring for our young who are in out-of-home care. For me, one of the challenges inherent in corporate parenting is to establish and then ensure continuity of carer relationships for the infant, the child or young person, up to and well beyond the exit process. To quote Winston Rickards, there is a child in every adult. Another challenge is to rank and equate the importance of the mental health of the child or young person with their physical health, and so ensure that the management and the treatment of mental ill health of the young person is of the same quality and timeliness as the attention to their physical health. This is unequivocally a responsibility of each and every part of the complex out-of-home care system, and including the political parameters. And this needs to be underpinned by society's demand and the allocation of resources that you've mentioned, Paul: financial, professional, and practical. Paul, you quoted George W. Bush, the soft bigotry of low expectations. And I'm sure the people with us this evening would now like to engage in discussion with you about out-of-home care and the groundbreaking work of Homestretch, especially in the context of the current climate of low expectations for our children and youth that is sadly and unfortunately still endemic in our society. So, Paul, thank you very much indeed. And I would like to open the discussion for people here and for our colleagues and participants who are on Zoom. Thank you, Susie.
Thank you very, very much, Ruth. We now will welcome questions. There are microphones. So if anybody in the audience would like to put a question to Paul, perhaps you could come up here, Paul, and I'm going to get you to stand at the podium here. People on Zoom may also put questions, and our secretary here, Cecilia Winkleman, will receive those questions and they can be put to Paul to respond. There's a question already come through on Zoom. Yes, please.
What do you think about a child and youth mental health service for children in and out of home care extending until age 25 also, and take on any children of these kids as required?
So what do I think about mental health services for children up to 25 in care? That's what is the question asking. Yeah, well, look, really good question, and thanks for joining on Zoom. Who's that from? Good on you, Barry. Thanks for that question. Could you make it a little bit easier, Barry? That would have been nice. But a couple of things I would say to Barry. I tend to divide youth up into about 4 or 5 different categories, and it's based on age, to tell you the truth. 13 to 15, 15 to 17, 17 to 21, 21 to 25. And that sometimes when we think about the word youth, we tend to think it's some sort of, same group right across the spectrum, but it's not. Each of those stages, and it's the fastest growing stage of the human mind and body in the whole of our lives, it all slows up, gets pretty boring at my vintage after a while, but it all slows up. But this fast development, what I would say is important is, of course, as you say, up to 25, because science would say that the body, the brain is still growing and developing up to that point. Now, it's interesting about, if I could just digress for a minute, where did the term 18 come from, and why was it such a threshold? Well, the history of it was it came out of Germany, right? It's some sort of threshold out there many, many decades ago. And as one parent pointed out to me who lost their child in care, they said, Paul, I had her over for dinner last night for her birthday, for birthday eve. And when she went to bed, and she woke up the next morning on birthday, she was still the same person. She hadn't advanced, she was just still the same person. Yet we're locked ourselves into this idea that there's, they cross the bridge and into adulthood at 18. All I can buy you is a beer, drive a car, and vote at an election. That's it. There's nothing else that goes with an 18-year-old. Absolutely nothing. Yet in Western society, we make a big deal of this. And this is our problem. I prefer, to answer Barry's question, is that if we start to look at our mental health support within those sort of age windows, we start getting more and more relevant to what are some of the things that are required by the mental health system for these young people. There has been a debate about whether youth could actually extend through to 25, such a treatment within this. And I think it has some challenges in selling that one, not from my perspective, but I'll use this parallel comment to talk about the challenges of services to a 25. A lot of people said to me during the home stretch, well, youth is through to 25. Why are you saying 18 to 21? Why aren't you saying 18 to 25? Why aren't you saying that, Paul? You should be out there banging the drum for the 22, 23, 24-year-olds. And I said, well, I didn't want to spend a half or quarter or a third or most of my time in my half-hour slot with the minister explaining why I got the 22, 23, 24. Because what a lot of campaigners in welfare and social policy and health policy don't quite, certainly I realise, is that Australia is very conservative in its policy changes, very conservative. And so if we move to 21, this is a way, the best way you're going to get policy change is that if you get a politician sort of getting it right from the get-go, you're starting to get hopeful about this. So one of the challenges about making a mental health system up to 25 is about, well, in fact, what does that look like? What does that look like, and how do we design that within that youth group? But I think health and mental health are the ones to lead in relation to the debate of the needs of the 22, 23, 24-year-old. I don't think it's a social work debate. I do think it's a health and mental health debate that could lead governments to see this important age group as needing as much support as I've advocated in my presentation in the 22, 23 up to the 25th year as it does for the teenage year. So there's a bit of a sort of a journey around that question.
But I guess that means that you would see headspace as being a very important development, and which is available to these.
Well, that's right. I think the challenge, and I'm not close enough to headspace to make a direct critique of it, but it's been a very welcome entry, and I think McGorry talks about sort of the missing middle and things like the missing middle, and I do agree. We've got the extreme end, and then we've got the soft end, and we don't have in the middle end. But I do think all the time some of these areas, from Headspace to other services, have to challenge themselves to make sure they're being, they're moving with this group, moving with their needs, being relevant to the needs being presented. And I think it's more like the service system has to keep pinching itself to say, am I being relevant to the young person? Because if I asked, and can I answer it this way, Susie, how come we only had care through to 18? How come we talked about leaving care rather than extending care, right? Systems start to just think and talk amongst themselves about what's improvement. And I think what we've got to make sure, is making sure that the young people that we're trying to attract into our services, it's our move. We are being relevant and practical and pragmatic and expert at the same time. And I think Headspace is making quite a powerful contribution to families and communities and young people. And as long as it continues to look at the needs out there in the community and shape accordingly.
Thank you. Was there another question here coming in? Somebody from the audience as well. We'll take one from the audience here.
Thanks so much, Paul. So I'm asking you a question that I know doesn't have an easy answer, but I think it's worth riffing off something you brought up that you might not have quite realised. So when you were talking about what the young people should or could get, you're kind of leaning into Maslow's hierarchy, the idea that these young people need housing, they need access to good care, access to food, etc., all the things that we would think was important for anybody, let alone these people. And I've been thinking a lot about Maslow's hierarchy and the importance of that, in fact, when children are very young in the child protection system. And I wondered about your reflection on that same sort of thinking all the way down in terms of children who are in out-of-home care, younger children who are in resi care, and whether you think or have got some ideas about how we lean much more into that idea of Maslow's hierarchy and not dismiss the importance of housing, access to medical care, access to childcare, schools. And if the government is the parent locus, then in fact, how do we give them the very best of those things as you would give if you were a very rich parent, which in fact the government is?
Thanks, Sharon. It's a really good question. And I think where Sharon's going, I'll take it this way. And look, I ran the child protection system for some time as Deputy Secretary in the department. And I think and I was a custodian of it. I was responsible. That my commentary in my earlier part of my paper was the default position of raising a child is managing them. We're managing children in care. Now, when you look through that window, it's a pretty, not a bleak window, but it's a pretty 1-2-dimensional window. They've got a care, we've got a bed, we've got a worker. Okay. That's the prompters for the system. And the system is hardwired to actually value those prompters. It gets concerned about unallocated workers to a child, but doesn't get equivalently concerned that child can't get into a school or has moved 5 schools or it has moved 6 placements. So I think it would be interesting to develop, if we could say, Sharon, a Maslow's hierarchy for a young person in care to revalue the importance of one worker, to revalue the importance of one placement, to revalue the importance of a health checkup, to get reading glasses, to revalue the things that a normal child would take and accept for granted. So I think that's an interesting proposition because I think the system doesn't ask those questions. Yet where I was trying to end, where I was trying to end is the ordinary plenty is one worker, one contact, one house, staying in a placement for the time of my time in care. And I think we've ended up having a system that apologises, wrings its hand, of saying, oh yeah, no, the average number of a child protection worker for a child in out-of-home care, and I'll give it to you, what the average number of workers a child would expect in out-of-home care, it's 11, right? The average number of placements moved, that we've become as a system immune to this. So a hierarchy of needs to remind us what's important in a child's life as we're running this difficult system would be a helpful way to actually orientate the system back to what we value the most in our own children and we want to value the most in kids in care. I hope that sort of attempts to go where you want it to go, but if not, happy to hear more from you. Yeah.
It is this odd dissonance that we have, that somehow children, even not in out-of-home care, even other people's families, don't get even the basics that we would give our children. Like, they can't get good access to healthcare.
No.
They don't get to go to all the best schools. They don't get tutoring, all those sorts of things that if you're going to reverse the equity kind of disadvantage, you would do. So it always just blows me away that we can't, even though the government is the richest parent around.
Yes. And I think the proposition is government have at their disposal those resources for this very disadvantaged group. And that's what we're trying to go with in this next phase.
I think we had another question from the centre. Is that correct or? No? Okay. We'll take this one from the front here.
Thank you very much, Paul. The thing that I really liked about this was that it is an emphasis on needs rather than the imposition of solutions that professionals might have, which is to send them for mental health, to send them for this or that. I really think that the thing that's most missing in this group is connectedness. And one of the things I don't like about Maslow's hierarchy is it actually emphasises the individual as somehow the supreme creation of the person, whereas in fact nobody lives alone, nobody is unconnected, and we must prioritise the connectedness rather than necessarily go into silos of mental health or headspace or whatever they do. Barry's question was interesting in that he's talking about older kids who may be able to make decisions about choosing mental health, but in fact, quite often these things are imposed and in an uncoordinated way, and therefore the child is not responsive because nobody is speaking to their needs. Everybody's speaking to the way they want that person to be, even if that person's got no idea that they want to be that way. And I think this is one of the real successes of this program, is that we have, you try to put back connectedness as a central plank of what we do as human beings, rather than isolate the child as they leave home. I don't know if you would actually focus on this idea of connectedness or have thought about it. It looks like it's all over it to me, and I congratulate you and I thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks.
We have another question from Zoom.
Really? Okay. Paul, you mentioned how crucial it is for the corporate parent to be curious about the wishes, hopes, and fears of children and for children to really experience this curiosity. Children in out-of-home care have faced the trauma of losing their birth parents and therefore will find it difficult to trust and confide in their new corporate parents. On the other hand, those who are tasked with parenting children in out-of-home care are often hamstrung by lack of training and support, which would help them to understand these children and weather the storm of their traumatized responses to care. Given these factors, how do we help children and their corporate parent tune in to each other so that the words of children can be heard by the parent and the clumsy but well-intentioned responses of the parent can be understood by the traumatized child?
Yeah. Might be Zoom, but you know, they've got a real dart to these questions, haven't they? Look, I think this is an interesting part. There's two quick comments I'll make, and I think the person written, who is that? Sorry, Anonymous. Anonymous has raised an interesting or made an interesting observation about the voice of the child within the care system. And look, I know enough young people that I've rehoused out of the care system and given them, through a number of initiatives, their housing in place, and then had the chance to talk to them about what's been the experience like. How was it? And they said well, for the first time, once they got out of care, they felt like the adult, whether it was my workers or myself or others, listened to them. Something happened because they were no longer in the care system they listened to. Otherwise, they had to go along with all the decisions that were made. And this is a common comment from care leavers. And the comment isn't that I or my workers are listening to them. The comment is, I wasn't listened to when I was in care. And so I would say particularly with mental health, disability, to name two disciplines, are way ahead in client voice or hearing the voice of the child, young person, adult, parent, much further ahead than what the care system is. In fact, it's very embryonic to hear. There's a lot of sort of wringing of the hand saying we want client voice within the discipline of children, youth and family, but, it's still a fringe player in informing good policy. Now, one of the things that I probably didn't highlight in the campaign, because I didn't want to talk a lot about the campaign in the sense of where I wanted to go, was we used the care leaver as an critical voice in relation to, I'm just some tosser in a suit, but they're going to listen to some kid I brought in there and their experience. And this is where we need to go, of hearing more the child. And the other comment was the comment of the parent, or the feedback to the parent, by the parent to the child. Now, Anonymous could be talking about, is it the corporate parent feedback to the child, or is it the natural parent? And I'll say two things. Well, I've used the term corporate parent, but I don't want to actually diss or insult any of the biological parents of all of these children. They are and they always will be their mum and dad. They are and always will be their son and daughter. So I'm trying to describe what the role of the state, though, has taken on, and that is about this. And I think the state, up to home stretch, were completely and utterly disinterested about where the child they'd been cared for went after they left from there. Honestly, I can say in every state in Australia, not one minister could tell me how many care leavers they knew where they'd gone and what happened to them. Not one. So what we're trying to do is educate the state to say, dialogue with these young people. You're on a journey together. It's not this managing journey. You're on a journey together, of which, sure, you're the authority and the corporate parent. However, we have a system that's marinated in risk adverse rather than in opportunity chance. And so it will always default to being the minimalist on those things. So I think Anonymous is suggesting, this is an area that could actually produce riches. And I'd say, yes, they would. If we allowed avenues for the child and young person to speak more and become more mainstream in the feedback to the system and for the care the other way. Interestingly, you'll see the symposium, Home Stretch Symposium on the 15th, 16th of May. The only reason why I'm pointing that out is that the MCs for this, we've got Emeritus Professor Robbie Gillingham, we've got 3 people coming from the UK, we've got, the head of Australian Housing Fund, we've got all these big heavy hitters. It will be MC'd by 2 care leavers right the way through the 2 days. And I think what we've got to, because we've got to create opportunities in which not only give them chance, but for us who have got our hands on the system to listen. And, just as an aside, that's an approach we're taking for this symposium.
I've got a microphone and I've got a question.
Oh, okay.
Paul, I'm really affected by the word corporate parent. And you've made a number of bleak or not so bleak references to managerialism. And I'm just wondering if you'd comment on that, please.
It's a really good question. I'm not quite happy. I don't think we've landed. You know, it's a new evolving. I don't think we're quite landed with our vernacular, with our language here. In the role of the parent is getting closer. There's other framing called community parenting, which is exactly the same thing, but saying community parenting, which is kind of thing, but not quite understood quickly. I'm probably saying, I'm probably trying to achieve two things in the one thing which isn't right. The first thing I'm trying to achieve is, hello, state, you've got some parenting you need to continue to do here. And because that's the job you took on up to 18 in that role. And to humanise it, if I could, to the state institution that your function actually is parental actions. So that's why we get up to that end, and the Northern Hemisphere have adopted that. But I don't think, I think it clangs a bit, and I think maybe you're suggesting, you talked about we're managing, not raising, but then you keep on banging on about corporate parent rather than in the role of the parent. So I think we're still a work in progress.
I wonder what secretaries and premiers would suggest, in the sense that like they are hamstrung by the corporatisation of government. And yet when you spoke to one of them and they went, oh, you mean like I am with my own kids, like they get it instantly. They want to care.
Yeah, they do. So part of that job as a minister hasn't said this to me, but what's going on in his or her mind is they've got a problem with this. They haven't got a problem that's a bad problem. It's actually a good problem. They've got a problem. They're telling other ministers of other departments, and it doesn't work like this in a Westminster system, who their priority group should be. Now, how's Mr. Hang on, Minister, just don't tell me. Don't tell me your problems have got enough of my own. And that's, or, gee, I love that idea, but, good luck with that. I've got these other needs. The mental health minister would say, hang on a minute, I'm missing 70% of people with acute mental illness getting into my beds, let alone this group. So part of the challenge that we've got to put it in this terms is trying to say that everyone's involved with this group. You are all the state. You play a part, even though you haven't put your hand up. You are obligated. You've got a role to play here. So the language is trying to solve a couple of problems, which stop number one, if I could say, is trying to get a whole of government, force or movement around this group. And as I said, and many ministers have, and I'll give you the line that they give. Yeah, but talk to any minister. Before we got Homestretch pulled off, they said, "Yeah, Paul, but I got the kindergartens, I got the kids. I'm up to my neck with children still in child protection. You want me to actually do something for those who have left?" And I say, I know you've got a Congo line coming to the door of everyone looking for your assistance, and particularly if they're Minister of Youth Justice and Housing and Homeless. I said, but this is the only group that you've had a legal guardian relationship over. The rest of them, all pretty important needs, but they've never had a legal guardian relationship with the state like you have with these children. And that's why they're in a queue of your own. You can do that queue, but you've got to do this queue. Now, all of this talking, which sometimes clangs, is we're trying to get the rusted bolts of government moving more naturally to understand that they are a part of the state, like what we've seen the Scots, like what we saw with legislating UK, and like what I think in Australia is the first way we'll have to get this done, and that is, and Homestretch hasn't been legislated, it's just happening, but with this practice of telling departments, I think our first step is to get a legislation in to explain it's a whole of government responsibility to raise these children. That's where I'm going. And the language hasn't quite married up, but we're purposeful on the language because of the particular individuals, particular institutions we're talking to. I hope that makes a little bit more sense.
I'd like to make a comment and ask you to comment on this, and that is really to underline the sort of thing that Joe was bringing up before, that I agree with you that the language is the tenor of the language that's used terribly important, and the notion of connectedness, that we are all people doing this work. We are all people with thoughts and feelings about being a child, being a parent, being part of a family. It's very, very difficult in, amongst policymakers and people who are in more administrative type positions in government departments and so on to be able to relate to that more human aspect of what it is, as you clearly can do in your, as a CEO of a big organisation, that kind of a stance, I think, is quite difficult for a lot of people to get onto, but yet it is absolutely essential. And from the point of view of the young people involved, it certainly is. I was put in mind of some research that one of our colleagues here tonight, Kay Gagan, some research work that she did some years ago, where she looked at Aboriginal children in mostly in kinship care, but found that the one essential ingredient amongst the young people who felt that they'd done better was that they had one stable foster care worker.
Yeah, that's right.
That was a very powerful element in the care that they'd experienced, quite apart from the kinship situation.
Well, I'll make a quick comment, Susie.
Yeah.
Okay. They're all ministers. That's a treasurer. I was 3 minutes into the conversation, he leaned over the table and said, and guess what he started to talk about? His 18-year-old daughter. Okay? I've got a lot of faith and optimism. It's true. Administrative bureaucrats, I was one, ministers, we label them like, and you don't know what's really going on, and this is the real thing, and this is human life, but you're doing this. And the critique is completely correct. We all sit and shake our heads, right? But I can tell you, in the clinches, when you're talking one-on-one, we're talking about things that, in fact, we understand, that they quickly understand. I mean, for McGowan, of all the decisions he'd made over all the years to pick out, because he said, I was getting dressed knowing I'll be asked what that thing, pick out that. Treasurer goes that. So what I'm saying is, it's sometimes their decisions which is missing, but it's sometimes our ability or inability to get across, right, the connections and the reform, and be articulate in a realist way. Someone asked me, gee, why'd it take so long, 8 years? And I said, well, I didn't think, 8 governments changing their mind in 8 years was too shabby, but it's but still it was 8 years, right? And how come you're successful? And I said, because we persisted happily. Now, sometimes from the advocate side, we see persistence as grinding away and being, but the fact is, I think that, we have to appreciate this is a conservative, very conservative system we're dealing with that won't do a left or right-hand turn, out of the blue or on a whim. Though
we don't like disruption.
And That's right. And we don't like ideas that we hadn't have thought of, in the first place, in the sense of come to the party. So can I just say, in getting this over the line, part of it's talking to the heart, part of it's talking to the mind, and part of it is actually understanding the limitations that we have in our Westminster system and the people sitting within it. And I think all I say about campaigners is that, well, we got this up and they want to talk some more. There is 2 ministers in this country who are talking about legislating possibly what we're proposing from the role of whole of government as a corporate parent. 2. Now, we haven't taken 8 years to get there. That's only taken us 6 months. I mean, I don't know if they're going to do it or not, but, it's been received. So what I'm saying, Susie, is though we get frustrated with our institutions, it's important we engage with our institutions and persist in that dialogue in a interpersonally, accessible way, if I could put it like that. This sounds a bit sort of abstract and daggy, but that's one of the keys to, I think, bringing serious reform for disadvantaged groups.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now we have another question from a Zoom.
Yes, from a Zoom. Okay. This question, you may feel you've already answered it, but it's about child protection legislation. Do we need a full reform? It's targeted at young children and seems inadequate to assist older youth and younger adults.
Yeah, no, what a great question. It should be called the Child and Youth Protection System, but no one wants to do that. So that's a great question. Look, I'd throw to the likes of, I'd encourage people to have a look at Professor Leah Bromfield, who's director of the Australian Centre for Child Protection based out of South Australian University. And she talks about the child protection system is designed for a problem yesterday. That was find the bruise, find the fault, find the hurt, where in fact families are struggling and finding their children in child protection are struggling with poverty or mental illness in the home or issues of family violence. So the rationale of why we have a system that we once had compared to the current contemporary family, it needs a review, a recheck. Have we got the right system? Also, there's this false promise saying that needs a hierarchy and then we put them all in, as she talks about, sort of they all come to the hospital, we put them into the waiting room, but we don't quite get to everyone. And so I do think in this country, we need to say, have we got the right child protection system for the contemporary needs of families in this state, in this country? So I think the tenet of the question on Zoom has said, should we have the reflection, the review? I think sometimes we review for the wrong reasons. It's usually a shocking incident or an incident of a child that drives child protection reform. But I think Leah and others are asking the right questions, like have we got a system for today? But I think we've got to make sure that there's strength in numbers, that states get together and ask them. And the reason why I'll say is this: no state wants to know that they've got child protection cases without workers, high demand, no one's getting seen for the right reasons. Interestingly, I'll make this observation. Every state in this country has the same problem in child protection, has the same problem, okay? So if we stick that and make those connections between states about how do we collectively think about child protection rather than, because they're so in the spotlight and ministers are so in the spotlight, it's very hard to get change. To ask some brave questions about, have we gone too far in mandatory reporting? Have we gone too far on not helping mum? Have we got a system that knocks on the door and says to mum, what did you do, rather than how can I help? These are the things that I think we would see less children in the out-of-home care if we are prepared to take the brave step of reviewing the current system we've got against the current needs that families are wanting from us. I think we've done.
I've got another question I'd like to ask, if that's Okay, which is that you've been presenting the issues and the problems across the whole of the population. You mentioned at the beginning that our Aboriginal communities suffer more under the current regimes. I'm wondering whether you see there to be any particular things that, whether you've come across any particular things that would seem to be more appropriate for use by governments in dealing with those particular communities.
Yeah, so I confidently and absolutely would say we are in this state the luckiest place in Australia in relation to the being led by ACOs, Aboriginal childcare organisations, in the principles of self-determination within child protection. Big statement, but I stand by it, and the reasons why I stand by it is this. Every other state and territory which have got higher Aboriginal numbers are looking at Victoria for this simple and most important reason. In our legislation now, the powers of the Secretary are now moving to the CEOs of the ACOs. Right? So we've been on a reform journey, or ACO's been on a reform journey, in which we want to see Aboriginal children looked after by Aboriginal care agencies. That hasn't been happening, and certainly there is an issue about Aboriginal carers. We've got about 48%, 52% of children of Aboriginal descent being actually cared for in child protection by Aboriginal agencies, but 48% not. So the reform has been, we've been on this journey, not we, but ACOs have been on this journey, but I've been part of this journey for the last 8 years of this first step, where child protection has made a determination on a child to be supervised or removed. In that case, and that care and the decision of whether that care continues or anything changes is made by the ACO. Now we've got VACA and BDAC, which is the Bendigo District Aboriginal Co-op, and now BARDAC, Ballarat Aboriginal District Group, and VACA, and Rumballara now, and I believe one other. There's about 5 who are moving, who have been there, and 3 of them, and they're heading towards this next step, of which VACA and BDAC are being trialling, and that is now having the complete powers of the Secretary, the complete powers. That is the power to remove the child or not. All right? The complete powers being acted by not a delegate, not as a delegate, but in their own right. Now, what they're saying after the last 12 months, and this is why Victoria is very unusual and very strong on this, we've got a long way to go, and we've got more children per capita in out-of-home care than any other state in Australia. So it's not a bed of roses. That is Aboriginal children. But I'll say this to you, Susie, that what those Aboriginal agencies are showing is they're doubling or tripling reunifications back to their biological family as a result of their intervention. They don't call it investigation. They call it big auntie thinking. It's all culturally infused, and it's actually resonating with many, many in the community. So where we want to go, I'm being royal we in the sense of being part of a sector, but where the Aboriginal, reform for children out of home care, which is in poorly rates both here in Victoria and other states, is that we've got to back the strategy of self-determination. It may take us a long while, but in fact, the steps that have been made by the brave agencies such as BARDAC, BDAC, VACA, Rumballara, and so forth, Gunditjamara, I think thinking a range of others, is that they're taking the brave step where everything else going on of taking on these powers and working in their communities with these powers. So I can only say to you, there is a torchlight being shined in the way. I think that demand and condition is very still serious and shameful, but I just wanted to highlight that there is a view, this this path that we've been on for the last 18 years that is legislating Victorian legislation is probably one of the under discussed phenomenons going on in Australia in relation to Aboriginal, too many children, Aboriginal care.
Thank you for that. And what about the Aboriginal involvement in home stretch itself?
Yeah. So one of the challenge I'll just say in relation to, I remember going across to Western Australia, and certainly we involved elders. So part of the logos you'll see snake, which is the Aboriginal Australian Peak Agency for Children, Youth and Family, VACA, all the ACOs. They're all signed on. It's interesting that Justin Muhammad, who's actually the ambassador for Aboriginal in the foreign affairs role at the moment, but he was his commissioner of Aboriginal children and young people here in Victoria. I asked Justin to come and talk at the symposium #1, and Justin said, "Yeah, I'll talk." And he goes, "But I won't talk about why you reckon that's good, Paul, about extended care. I'm not going to talk about it, but I reckon for my mob, it's good for different reasons." And he gave this speech and he said, "Yeah, I know, extended care would be good. Yeah, I know, maybe get more jobs and more housing, all good. But the thing I like about it is that we're keeping for 3 more years young people under good supervision and support so that they'll become, when they have their babies, they'll become better parents. So we don't see their babies coming back into care." And so I've always thought there's a at the symposium, I'm bringing across an agency called Yorganop in Western Australia. We've got 138 Aboriginal young people in extended care south of Perth. 138, all enjoying it. Look at their LinkedIn, Yorganop, and they talk about extended care and what it's doing for young people. It has its own cultural approach, but in fact the position, and I and other elders have helped me speak with communities, because they'll say this: we don't want our kids any longer in this bloody care than it has to. We want them back out in the community, right? And that is accepted, absolutely. But if the state or someone else is going to act to bring them into care, we want the best care for them at the same time. So I think it's a good question. I think it's in this area, we're not proposing this as a wide answer for Aboriginal Australia. We're in fact actually saying that it has to be Aboriginally owned and Aboriginally delivered. And I think the likes of Yorganop, VACA, and a number of others are showing the way.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious of the time, and I think we're probably going to have to move on to
Good
the finale.
Susie. The finale.
So stay where you are. Stay where you are.
Yeah.
And I'll invite President Joe Grimway to come to the podium and speak with you. So he'll share some words with us for a moment, and then we'll progress to the lobby together.
Thanks everybody for being part of tonight. 14 years of this symposia, a great joy. And Paul added to the rich variety of things that have been presented with he described himself as somewhat abstract and daggy at one stage. And I think that people who know him might believe that might be a reasonable description of the way he can cut through some of the many problems of talking with government, but still remaining at the level of the child and the family who need support. Paul, I'm glad that you came along tonight. I'm very appreciative of the work that Homestretch have done. I lived in a world where I didn't know about Homestretch till tonight. I think there's quite a few people who didn't really know about it. Lights wanted to go out. Apologies to those.
Giving us a hint, Joe.
Yeah, apologies to those at home in Zoom, anywhere. And I'm sure that the New Zealanders would have something to say. There is people on board from New Zealand about the way they manage.
They've led the way. They've been very good there. They're in front of Australia.
Yeah. But we have a little
Oh,
gift
thank you very much.
on a card.
Oh, great. Thanks,
And
Joe.
great thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Great to have been part of this. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Just before we go, I was supposed to say something about MythVic. MythVic has been going since 2000, and Winston Rickards started it. Mental health for young and their families. We wish for an advocacy group to be established across the country, and we want people to join. $50 a year is not an excess amount of money. We put on these sorts of forums, and we're fighting to have the voice of children really heard at all levels and through all means, not just professionals doing their work. We want people to join our committee who are care leavers, if you want, but also consumers of one sort or another, whether they be parents or young people. That's our purpose. We want to be. This is the purpose that Winston established for us, and in everything we do, we try and do that. People, please go to the website and find out about the activities of MythVic. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Joe. And we will ask people to move out to the lobby, but the past orators and the Rickards family, we would like to take a photograph before we leave. And cheerio to our Zoom people. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's been great to have you here.